Welcome to the program. There are fresh signs that the dispute over the British sailors seized by Iran could soon be resolved. In the past few hours, there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity in the region. This is what we know so far. Earlier, the British Prime Minister Tony Blair said the way is open for diplomatic efforts to secure their release, and the next 48 hours will be critical. Then, an Iranian diplomat kidnapped 2 months ago in Iraq was released. And it's been revealed that the Iraqi government is working to release 5 Iranians held in Iraq by the US. It's thought progress there could aid the release of the British servicemen. Tim Friend reports.
Both sides in this crisis now appear to be ready for serious negotiations. The Iranian First Vice President, Parvez Davoudi, is the latest official to indicate that a new phase is about to begin. He said, certainly if Britain accepts that they have illegally trespassed into Iran and guarantee that they won't repeat it, the issue will obviously become negotiable and can be resolved through a rational process. He was speaking as he opened new units at the Bushehr nuclear plant, and his words were echoed by Iran's chief negotiator, Ali Larijani. The timing of the Vice President's comments are significant. The United States and some of its allies fear that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program under cover of its civilian nuclear program. Iran denies this. Mr. Davoudi chose a rare visit for the Western press to comment on the captured Britons. And in Britain, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, spoke about a crucial 48 hours ahead.
All the way through, we have had, if you like, 2 very clear tracks on this. One is to try and settle this by way of peaceful and calm negotiation to get our people back as quickly as possible. The other is to make it clear that if that's not possible, then we have to take an increasingly tougher position.
These are the latest pictures of the 15 British sailors and Marines. They were captured by Iranian forces in the Persian Gulf on March the 23rd. Tehran claims the crew was in Iranian waters, but Britain insists its troops were in Iraqi waters working under a United Nations mandate. In his latest comments, President Bush called their detention indefensible. Here at the Foreign Office in London, officials admit it's impossible to predict exactly what will happen next. But there does appear to be some movement, and perhaps over the next couple of days, the results of that negotiation may be realised. It's possible that a UK delegation could travel to Iran, not to negotiate, but to view the scene where the sailors were arrested. Tim Friend, Al-Jazeera, London.
Ali Reza Ronaghi is our correspondent in Tehran. He says there seems to be a real diplomatic push to resolve the standoff.
The standoff between Iran and Britain over the seizure of 15 Royal Navy sailors by Iran is going to take leaps forward very soon. Iranian top nuclear negotiator Ali Larijani has said that negotiations between British Foreign Office and Iranian Foreign Ministry have started, and if they go on as they have started, they may lead to a solution to the whole row between Iran and Britain. There has been an Iranian diplomat who was kidnapped in Baghdad streets 2 months ago, who have been released today. And this release has been interpreted by some analysts as something like a trade-off to be used between Iran and Britain over the 15 sailors. But Iran has denied that, saying that there is no connection between the release of Iranian diplomat and possible good news about the 15 Navy sailors.
A 2-day national strike in Zimbabwe was supposed to highlight the country's economic crisis. But rather than bringing it to a halt, the 20% of Zimbabweans who actually have jobs turned up for work as usual. Calais Maestri reports.
Morning rush hour in downtown Harare. It looks like any other day in the city. The few that have jobs making their way to work, despite calls for a 2-day strike by the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. The union is protesting the country's economic troubles. 4 out of 5 Zimbabweans are out of work. Inflation is at 1,700%, and even basic food supplies are expensive. Few are willing to join the protest if it means having less money to feed their families. Across the border, workers in South Africa gather in solidarity. amongst the many Zimbabweans who fled their homeland in search of a better life. They're all here to protest poor working conditions, low salaries, a lack of human rights and the detention of Zimbabwean union officials.
We want an end to the persecution, the beating up, the harassment of trade unionists and opposition parties in that country.
Poverty and lack of political freedom have seen some 3 million Zimbabweans leave the country. This protest march isn't just about worker rights in Zimbabwe, but also for the workers in South Africa. Many Zimbabweans fleeing that country's economic troubles come here hoping for a chance at a better life, only to find that they're once again being taken advantage of.
Stop exploiting!
In South Africa, Zimbabweans, many without work permits, are underpaid and work in dire conditions.
It is very difficult because people are taking advantage of that the Zimbabweans, they don't have South African papers. They employ you after working for a month. When it is the time for them to pay you, they ask for papers, of which you don't have.
Who are paying the price for that now?
At least these workers can take to the streets. Many of those still in Zimbabwe are forced to suffer in silence. A new United Nations study says Zimbabwe was Africa's worst economic performer in 2006. And the International Monetary Fund says inflation could reach 4,000% by the end of the year. Kale Maestri, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
In Cairo, Arab, African, European and US diplomats are meeting to see how they can restore law and order in Somalia. The talks aim to negotiate an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of Ethiopian troops. This would allow African peacekeepers to take charge. Violence in Mogadishu over the last 4 days has left 400 people dead. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir is insisting that only African Union forces will be in charge of peacekeeping operations in the Darfur region. Al-Bashir addressed the Sudanese parliament on Monday. He has rejected the deployment of a UN force to join African Union troops, saying the West was plotting neo-colonialism in the African nation. According to the UN, at least 200,000 people have died and more than 2 million have been displaced since the Darfur conflict erupted in 2003. Iraq has invited foreign firms to drill 100 oil wells in the country's south to boost production. A law opening Iraq's oil fields to international companies is expected to be approved by July. The world's top oil companies have been maneuvering for years to drill there. In February, the Iraqi government approved a draft oil law to control how the country's oil wealth will be shared by its ethnic and sectarian groups. The US president has told the Democrat-led Congress to hurry up and pass a bill tying his request for war funding to a timeline for troop withdrawal from Iraq. George Bush says troop equipment, training and welfare will suffer if Congress starves the Pentagon of money for war. Bush says his threat of veto still stands.
The House and Senate have spent this time debating bills that undercut the troops by substituting the judgment of politicians in Washington for the judgment of our commanders on the ground, setting an arbitrary deadline for withdrawal from Iraq, and spending billions of dollars on pork barrel projects completely unrelated to the war. I made it clear for weeks that if either the House or Senate version of this bill comes to my desk, I will veto it.
The highest-ranking American politician to visit Syria in the last 4 years has arrived in Damascus. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is leading a delegation from Congress. At the airport, she met Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim. President Bush doesn't support the trip, saying it sends mixed signals to the country's President Bashar al-Assad. Pelosi will push the Syrian leader over efforts to try Rafiq al-Hariri's suspected killers. Thousands of lawyers and political activists have been protesting across Pakistan, demanding the reinstatement of the country's former Chief Justice. Pakistan's President Pervez Musharraf sacked Iftikhar Mohammad Chowdhury, accusing him of abusing his authority. But Musharraf's critics are outraged. Kamal Haider reports from Islamabad.
Violence outside Pakistan's Supreme Court. Opposition protesters, some dressed as lawyers according to TV reports, mixing with real members of the legal profession, breaking through police cordons demanding that Iftikhar Chowdhury be reinstated and President Musharraf resign.